Hello there, English 215 students. This is your Professor Michael Martin. I'm going to try a screen recording to show you a couple things about the two readings that you're doing this week. My Cave Life in Vicksburg by Mary Loughborough and A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Both of these pieces are memorable for their historical importance. They're both written by women, Southern women, during the Civil War, while the Southern lands, of course, were being shelled and occupied by Northern soldiers. The unique thing about these two pieces is that we get a first-person female perspective from a Southern perspective, which contrasts with Whitman and Melville from last week. I would say the Loughborough piece is a little more, quote, literary, unquote, than the Dawson piece, who is basically writing a diary of her experience in Baton Rouge, a little bit of New Orleans. So that's the historical importance of that. The things you want to note about my cave life in Vicksburg, I presume that some of you are from Thibodaux or know the area well. So we're talking about the caves of Vicksburg near the river, near the Mississippi River, and how the caves provide a natural kind of barrier on the side of the river that Mary Loughborough, her child, and her Confederate general husband sometimes would come and stay. Vicksburg, like many places, was bombarded, shelled, eventually lost to the Union Army. I guess it would be the new Union Navy. And what we get here are the shellings. In these 3 or 4 chapters that I've asked you to read, you get a little bit of the shellings and the day-to-day life. I'm very interested in the day-to-day life of these two women while they're in Louisiana and Mississippi, respectively, during the Civil War. If you look with me on chapter 13, when she says she ran to a dressing room, right? What she's talking about is her, I'll show you another image. This is a title page. It was very exciting for people to read about the cave life, try to make it as dramatic as possible. Imagine staying in a cave during wartime. So that's my cave life in Vicksburg. But the actual drawing or dressing room is in the cave. They made these little rooms and they made these areas where different people could stay. And so one's a dressing room. She still has her servant. So there's still the kind of indentured servitude and slavery that we get going on still at this time. But we're interested in her living arrangement there. She is an upper-class woman. She is not used to this occupation and this war. And a couple things that stood out to me in the section you read for today. First, for my cave life in Vicksburg, one of the things that comes to mind, she eventually meets a Union, he's either a general, a ranking officer in the Union Army. They exchange courtesies as she's walking through occupied Vicksburg. So if you're interested in what it would be like for a Southern gentlewoman, white gentlewoman, quote unquote, to see Union General, it's important and interesting for that aspect. But one of the things that stood out to me was the terrible motherhood portrayals in this piece. If you look with me for a moment, she's describing the moonlight. And remember that the Union thinks the Confederates are moving by moonlight and repairing the damages they've done. And she says she's sleeping by one side of the cave, and she starts hearing these lamentations. She says, "I sat near the square of moonlight, silent and sorrowful, hearing the sobs and cries, hearing the moans of a mother for her dead child, the child that a few moments since lived to caress and love, speaking the tender words that endear so much the tie of a mother and a child." And basically what had happened, the paragraph before tells us that there was a bombardment of Union shells, artillery attacked, and there was a crushing, unfortunately, of the little child's head by the cave walls, the rocks falling down. I mentioned this moment both for its kind of emotional importance, but also simply to show how she frames this experience as a woman and as a mother, right? So we get that element going on there. The femininity, femalehood are part and parcel of both of these first-person journals or diaries that we're seeing. So we get a little bit of that in Mary Loughborough's piece. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you was, where are you? There's chapter 16. She talks about the daily life being monotonous, the daily monotony of our lives. She tells each account what happens on a daily basis. If you were to do that question for the forthcoming essay, like comparing Loughborough with Dawson, you might mention they're waiting for the shelling of the cave during the day, and there usually are injuries, like this little boy playing near the mouth of the cave. All of these things seem to occur. She gets pronouncements of what's occurring from kind of male soldiers who come here and there, including one. This is a normal device, just use the first letter and then the names kind of dotted out. It's a normal 19th century literary device. But in chapter 17, she leaves her cave, at least temporarily, and goes to an office, which is basically a wooded hillside that's hidden. And in it are, graceful grapevines, swinging branches, large roof, a wall and a roof made from natural impediments, once again, around Vicksburg. The idea would be that this was a temporary place. The more the cave was shelled, she'd come there. Of course, this place is shelled as well. I was trying to show you the horrors of war. She feels completely unsafe as she's living in Vicksburg in these caves. But this piece, as I mentioned, became kind of a titillating thing. People wanted to study about the woman who survived Vicksburg, and it became somewhat well known as a Southern piece of literature in the 19th century, a first-person female account of the war. So you get that with My Cave's Life in Vicksburg. Sarah Morgan Dawson, she's younger. She's about 20, give or take. And the unique thing is that she's in Baton Rouge. So she's right around the area, somewhat near, where Thibodaux and Nicholls State are located. These two women, of course, would be Confederate sympathizers. All the men around them would have been fighting or, traveling for the war. And she is one of the people that you'll want to know. When she keeps talking about her Harry, right? When she keeps talking about Harry in her piece, A Confederate Girl's Diary, that's her brother, right? That's Dawson's brother. Let me pull it up for you real quick. Sorry about that. All right. What she's doing is basically recalling the men who've passed away. She's writing this diary after the fact, so it's after the Civil War has occurred. And what Dawson is articulating, and I asked you to kind of look at the first 13 to 14 pages. Look, you get the nice frontispiece there. That's the image opposite of a title page. You look at the title page right there of a book. You've got some interesting illustrations right there. And you get the introduction from the male narrator, male editor who had heard her and kind of wanted to put her book into print. But she's writing this in Baton Rouge in 1862. She does not presume an audience. I feel like Loughborough does. That may be another topic that you could do if you wanted to compare these two women's work. But we get all these family and friends. We get Miriam, her friend, and she says, here I am at your service, Madam Idleness, waiting for any suggestion for my weary brain. It's a cloudy Sunday afternoon in Baton Rouge. This piece, it talks about her family members. It talks about Harry, and Harry is her brother who died in a duel. If you didn't catch it, he's at a social gathering, and he is offended by one of the males there. They have a duel. He ends up dying. So she loses her brother. She loses her father. And for what this is, if you look at page 5 with me right here, I'm interested in the actual reminiscences of the Civil War, the actual fighting with soldiers. And so we get to see the fall. This is a common theme in Civil War literature. At the beginning, there's great promise, or people are thrilled about the fight. Often from a Confederate perspective. They are, but by the end, the war is depicted as horrific, and there's no gaiety involved within it. She says here, the commencement of 61 promised much pleasure for the rest of the year. And though secession was talked about, I do not believe anyone anticipated the war that has been desolating our country ever since, with no prospect of terminating for some time to come. So it's one of those few moments in the first 13 or 14 pages where we get a larger historical reference. What it would have been like to have been in Baton Rouge. She mentions she's obviously reading the papers because she's talking about the ironclad ram at New Orleans, like the Union wants to get, right, New Orleans is going up the Mississippi, trying to get into New Orleans. And, she mentions the larger Confederate strategies. But if you're looking for an angle into this, I think this piece gives us a little bit of a social occasion of a young girl. She seems to be middle class as well. And her social gatherings, she goes over to a man's house at the evening. This is where the duel first had started, right there. But we get a sense for the social milieu or the way they act. There's the use of moonlight once again. So there is the Southern gentility angle marked or mixed with the realistic angle of war, death, and destruction. I only asked you to read the first 13 or 14 pages. The men, and you get this discussion here, how are you girls, would have been concerned with the women. Most of these people are her friends and characters. If we go back to this piece from 64 Parishes, she talks about her brother who died in a duel. She talks about at the beginning of the attack and when they had to move, all those particular things. So a lot of this is about the actual experience of being in the Civil War, being a woman, and as well as the social experience, as I mentioned previously, for Sarah Morgan Dawson. So all those things seemingly come into play. My interest in these two readings lie in their historical import rather than their literary quality, which is maybe questionable. Loughborough has a lot, but Dawson's is a diary that goes day by day. If you read Loughborough's, it's more, a chapter. We don't get the actual day, so we get kind of a balance between that. We get at least a glimpse in the life what it would have been like to be a woman at the time and to live as a female in the South during the Civil War. So we get some of that, and it's a progressively deteriorating condition for these women. So I think I'll leave the discussion at that. I hope these two readings, which you only need to read short excerpts of, go well. Think of fruitful ways you could prepare for the first essay, and good luck